Okay, and we are recording now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Global Citizens. We are actually at episode number 65. And today is going to be a little bit unorthodox compared to my previous 60 plus episodes, as somehow my software is disappointing me for the first time. I have no idea why, but hey, sometimes technology doesn't works against us. So with that, we have to learn to adapt as the way the environment is and the way the world has been. So without further ado, we will actually be starting this, well, the less than usual style of StreamYard, as I'm actually using Zoom for the very first time. So hooray, I guess this is something new. All right. So my guest today is an incredibly amazing woman. She has accomplished so much, and if I actually need to say her resume, I think I will lose half of my broadcast time. So my guest today is Dr. Devika Bhushan, MD and FAAP. So Devika is actually a third culture kid who was originally born in India. She spent a third each of her first 21 years in her home country, India, the Philippines, and the United States of America, where she is currently based. So she is a pediatrician who has trained at Harvard Medical School and Johns Hopkins. So back when she was at Stanford, Dr. Bhushan also conducted research on the health impact of gender norms. She has previously had policy analysis and research experiences in areas of gender-based stereotype threats for women in STEM. So along with that, she is also an experienced journalist and editor, having served as in her free time. Oh, sorry about that. Oh yeah, she was also an experienced journalist and editor. So I think along with that, she has served as the deputy news editor for the Columbia Daily Spectator, Columbia University's daily newspaper, and as the pediatric content editor for 2minutemedicine.com. So if I actually need to say any further, I think we can actually complete more than half an hour of the broadcast with all of Devika's accomplishments. So without further ado, I will just introduce her. So I'll pass her the floor. So hi, Devika, how are you doing?
Hi, Calvin. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the kind introduction. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for doing that. Actually, I hope I didn't mess up your introduction. I'm so sorry about
It
that.
was great.
Yeah. All right. So Devika, we will definitely get into a lot more on your research, yeah. But for now, I would like to know a little bit more about you and my audience too. So in my show, there is a term called the TC quest. So it is referring to the countries that you live in, the journeys that you have as a TCK. And I am so sorry, but the next question will lead to the question that every single one of us hate, and that is, how do you define your home? So yeah, I'll pass the platform to you.
Perfect. So, Calvin, as you were saying in the introduction, I really have three countries that kind of anchor me. And actually, it's interesting because in this view that you can see on the video, you can see a semblance of kind of all three of those countries. So originally, I was born in India. My first language was Hindi. I started out the first 7 years of my life starting school and starting my early life there. So you can see that the kind of cover that I'm wearing is from India. And then and then I moved to the US when I was a kid, when I was 7. And between the years of 7 and 11, I went to grade school in the US while my parents were graduate students. Mostly we were living on the East Coast, but we moved around a fair amount between New Jersey and Baltimore and right outside of Washington, D.C. and Bethesda, Maryland as well. And then when I was 11, we moved to the Philippines. And we did that because my parents had wrapped up their graduate degrees and they had started to transition to work at the World Bank. And then my father actually got a position at the Asian Development Bank, which has its headquarters, as you may know, in the Philippines.
Yes.
So we actually had kind of no idea what the Philippines was going to be all about. We didn't know, a single person in the Philippines when we all got on a flight from Bethesda, Maryland / Washington, D.C. and got ourselves to Manila. And so this happened when I was 11. I was in the 5th grade. And at that point, I actually was starting my 7th school in my 3rd country, right? And when we
Oh
moved
my
there,
goodness.
yeah,
That
there's a
must
lot
be,
of internal kind of shuffle even within the 3 countries. So that's what led to, like, you know, that level of sort of change when I was 11. So we moved there, and my dad and my mom, we thought that, oh, this is going to be like a 2 to 3 year stint max. And you won't guess how many years my parents ended up spending in the Philippines.
okay, let me take a guess. 7,
It's a good guess. Keep going.
10?
21 years in the Philippines. So
Uh,
actually, right behind me, can you see this
yeah,
painting?
yes, yes.
Okay.
Oh, it's lovely. What is it? What is it refers to
So
though?
what it is, so if you've ever been to the Philippines, and specifically Manila, you'll know that there's a form of public transport called the Jeepney.
Yep.
And what it is it's really like repurposed US military vehicles from the time that the US occupied the Philippines. And it's a very quintessentially Filipino thing. It's been every single Jeepney has on it just like beautiful decorations and all sorts of colors everywhere. And it's the way that you get to travel. It's like a minibus essentially, right?
Yep.
And you pay a very short amount of money, but you can take it whatever distance you want. And it's a very like communal experience actually when you get in. So it's not like a bus where you're facing forward the whole time. It's actually got 2 long benches inside, and so you're actually like facing the other people that you're sitting with, and it's just like a very family feeling kind of an experience. And so the jeepney is a very quintessentially Filipino thing. And when my parents moved away from the Philippines, which was now a couple of years ago, they moved back to India. My husband and I had been a few times together, and I'll tell you more about him in a minute, but we really wanted to have something in our home that represented, you know, all of those years that we spent, you know, calling the Philippines our new home. And so that's what this painting represents to me. And as you know, kind of a long-winded answer, because it's all, as you know, like all of us have a very kind of intricate and different way of thinking through what home means, right?
Yeah, and yet sometimes it could be similar. Am I right to say that for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, you know, now I've lived in the US. I'm 34 now. So as we're talking about that journey, I was in the Philippines between 11 and 18. And even though my parents stayed there, I went back to the US for studies. So I've been back in the US now between the ages of 18 and 34. So, so that brings us up, you know, to the majority of my life now has been spent in the US. But at the same time, while this feels like a home, and it feels like maybe the place where I am singly most comfortable, I find myself, there's like little tugs at my heart, right? When I haven't been to India in some time, in like 1 or 2 years, which has been the case now, it's been 2 years. Or if I haven't been to the Philippines, now it's been a couple of years there too. And there's just experiences and smells and sights and memories and nostalgia that kind of that's always going to be a part of your set of memories and your way of thinking about yourself. So I never want to like say I have one particular home or one particular way of thinking about my cultural belonging. It's always been a mixture.
All right.
And so I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I can understand that. While my background might not be as intricate as, well, as vast as yours, maybe, there are only 2 countries that is still, that I would consider deep in my heart, and that is where I'm currently at. Firstly is Indonesia, and where I grew up mostly, and that is Singapore, which is 15 years. So the thing is that with Singapore itself, it's a melting pot of culture. So as a result, you tend to see the different race and ethnicity. So as a result, you tend to need to jump over the hedge. You tend to need to understand their mindset, and sometimes you realize, hey, this style of living, this style of working is actually much more much more efficient, or it's something that suits me a lot better. So as a
Mm.
result, I tend to adapt a certain principle of certain cultures which is outside of my own. So I really get where you're coming from on that. Okay. May I
I
ask
love
though?
both Jakarta and Singapore so much. They're just such wonderful places to call home, to visit. I spent some time there.
All right. Yay. Okay. To be honest, I'm having a hard time even adjusting in Jakarta.
Oh, really?
I've been back here for almost 2 years now, and I mean, it's always going to be home to me, but it's just not the home I grew up in. So there are
Yeah.
certain traits, there are certain kind of characters that sometimes might not be as similar as how I had grown up with, but
Right.
I think that is part of life, right? That we have to learn to adjust to certain things.
It's
Speaking of
funny you
adjusting,
say that. Yeah,
yeah.
no, sorry, go ahead.
Speaking of adjusting, I'm sorry, guys. You might not be able to see me. Zoom is giving me a little bit of headache now at the moment, as while Devika's has been working well, thank goodness. You guys have seen my face all the while anyway, so it's fine. And coincidentally, the attire that I was wearing in the photo is the same as Devika's scarf. So hooray, that
It's
works.
meant to be.
Sorry, Devika. Yeah, earlier you were trying to say something.
Oh, I was going to say that feeling that you're having in the last couple of years of really trying to readjust to supposedly your home culture, your original home culture in Jakarta is like very similar experience to what my parents faced when 2 years ago they actually moved from Manila back to India.
Okay.
And at that point, they had been outside of India for almost 30 years as far as living, working, and just conducting themselves. And of course, we'd been home back to India to visit family for a few weeks at a time over summers and stuff like that. But going back there now for them, they're still working. They actually moved back to India for public health sector jobs, and the culture, the work culture, as well as different little things that that they had completely forgotten about as normal parts of life, like to readjust after that amount of time away is it's an undertaking. So I can completely understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask for yourself though? How would you define your anchor? So anchor as in like even with all of the international exposure in your life,
Yeah.
and I believe you and your husband, both of you enjoy traveling, yeah? So how do you actually at the end of the day, you know that at the end of the day you are Devika Bhushan, and it's
Yeah.
not a combination of any of the other culture, or you are not defined by all of this thing, or where you grow up at, whether it's India or it's the Philippines or even in the United States.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think you probably hear this answer a lot, and it may be true on some level for you too. Anytime you move that much, like I was saying, by age 11, seventh school in my third country, and with all of that whirlwind and sort of evolving circumstances, cultures, what's expected of you, what kind of friends are around you, like all of that is shifting every 6 or so months. And so the only constant, right, in your life are the people, the core family members that are experiencing all of that with you. And I would say that for me, since becoming um, you know close to my husband, even before we got married, he became sort of that next anchor and that person who makes me feel like I'm at home anywhere. And now we've actually been together for almost 15 years. So
Wow.
it's been a really it's been a long time. We met in college, second day of school, but we didn't start dating until our sophomore year. But it's been the majority of our adult lives we've essentially grown into adults together, kind of in parallel tracks. And thank goodness, like sometimes when you grow up with someone like that, you can grow together in the same kinds of complementary directions, or you can grow in different directions, right? And so for us, because we grew sort of around each other and molded ourselves really to be really complementary to each other, we've become that for each other. And I'm still very, very close to kind of my original nuclear family, my mom and my dad and my sister. But you mentioned my husband and I enjoy traveling together. So one thing that I will say that's never been like my anchor is physical possessions or things, right? Or actually even a physical home to come back to, because that was so inconstant in my life, right? Even when we were, for instance, stable in the Philippines for 7 years, we had a few different homes that we moved between. And we had, my husband and I had the really good fortune of spending 24 months or so on the road. So we were living out of suitcases. We each had a 15-kilo suitcase limit, and we basically put all of our worldly possessions, most of them we sold, and some of them we put in storage, the ones that we were really attached to. And then we just bought one-way tickets to places that we wanted to spend some time and get to know in a real way, right? Not in the way that like you'd land for like a week, which is wonderful. Don't get me wrong. That kind of travel is amazing. But when you're there for a week, it's a very different exposure, and you're seeing, the things that are really famous about that place, but you're not going and having dinners and lunches or experiences in local parts of town as much. And so what we really wanted to do was experience what it was like to actually live some places together. And every month to 2 months, depending on the place, we would switch it up, right? So we would usually get a rental apartment for 1 to 2 months at a time, in places like, we spent some time in Europe. So we were in Greece and Italy and Spain there. And we spent some time in the Middle East. And so we spent time there, in Tunisia, Palestine, Jordan. And then we spent some time, obviously, in Asia as well. So we went back to the Philippines. We spent about almost 6 months in India, but kind of living apart from the normal places we would go to visit family, and trying to experience it on our own terms. And my husband actually learned Hindi for the first time, because he is an Indian American, but he grew up in the U.S. And so his first language, yeah, it's different. His first identity and his first language is definitely the US. And so it was a really important thing for kind of that growing together that I was talking about, for us to have that shared experience of spending time in our country of origin together, and really for him to like to become a little bit more rooted in his Indianness. And similarly for me, but for me it was always like a nostalgic, my first home, like my first set of memories, all of that stuff. And for him, it was discovering it for that aspect of it, trying it on for size as a home for the first time. And that's the interesting part, right? Like you can do that at any age. And that's coming back to the question, like that's sort of what created that anchor. Like, even though everything was switching up all around us every 1 to 2 months, it was not chaotic, and it didn't feel like we were rootless, because we would build a home literally like every 1 or 2 months together, and it really just relied on each other for that anchorship and to feel at home.
Oh, okay. That's fantastic to hear. So mind if I ask though, why do you guys now, in a sense, you guys are considered settled in Los Angeles? So
in San Francisco, actually, but yes, close, very close.
Apologies. My apologies. Well, they're both in California. They're both in California. Okay. So yeah, apologies on that. So yeah, why do you guys now are considered settled in San Francisco?
Yeah, so it's that time that we had when we were on the road. Essentially, where I was in kind of my professional evolution was that I had just finished training to be a pediatrician. So that means, in the US, it's like, it's different than it is in other places. So I'll just spell out what that means. So it's, usually 4 years of undergrad. Sometimes people take some time off after that. And I didn't do that, but then there's either 4 or 5 years of medical school, depending. I did 5 years because I did a research year as well. And then 3 years of pediatrics residency. And then you're sort of able to apply for an independent board certification and license to be a pediatrician. And it had just been a very long road. And my husband, I'll tell you, he's somebody who always has thought outside of the box. So for instance, back when we were in undergrad together, he actually took a year off and started a couple of startups during that year off, and was kind of maintaining that while he was finishing up his bachelor's degree. And then after undergrad, he actually has been in the startup world for the last almost couple of decades. And so he has a very different way of sort of approaching life, right? So he doesn't do things on like an externally imposed timeline. He doesn't do things because of other people's expectations in any way. And so he had been working on me for some time to say, hey, like, let's do this really incredible thing together. Let's make this happen. And what's a natural pause point where we can actually like step away, specifically where you can step away from a professional point of view, in a time and a place that feels appropriate for that. So he had been working on me for this for some years. So by the time I was nearing the end of my residency program, he had just started a remote job at a company called DuckDuckGo. It's an internet privacy company. And knowing that, which meant he could do that work from literally anywhere in the world, knowing that was coming up, as was sort of this long road was coming to an end of training, it felt to me like it was the right time for me to sort of take a little bit of a pause on that career track. I didn't take a total pause. I was still working on a couple of research projects and papers from abroad, in chunks of time when that was possible. And I also love to write, so I was doing a lot of kind of reflection and journaling, and just processing a lot of experiences that I had during residency and during medical school that because of the pace of training, you don't always have the chance to sit with and to pause and reflect on and kind of make meaning of the way that it really should be. And so that was a really important time for me too, from that perspective of being able to take that kind of internal look and that soulful search of what I wanted to really come out of that experience wanting to do next. And I always had this sense that I really wanted to work. I love working with patients. I really find it so rewarding to be able to give a kid and a family just a little bit more clarity on what their health condition means and how they can help to think it through and to optimize it. And even when there isn't a particular health condition, to talk about like, how do you optimize development? How do you think about really excelling in school and things of that nature? So that's what pediatrics is all about. And it's definitely a very rewarding field. But I also, was lucky enough during residency at Johns Hopkins to have had some really formative experiences to help me understand that when you think about systems level change or policy in public health, that you can stand to make those sorts of movement and difference, but really for a whole population if it's done in the right way. And so I was kind of invigorated to learn more about these kind of more non-traditional paths for somebody who's clinically trained but really interested in the systems level issues. And so I applied to a couple of fellowship programs that really just train you to do that. So they give you either a master's in public health or in policy, and then some kind of practical experience to apply those kinds of skills. So I was lucky enough to do such a program at Stanford. And halfway through my program, I actually was lucky to meet my current boss, who's the California Surgeon General, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, and started to kind of work with her over a summer, and then started to work with her more formally as well. And currently I serve as her Chief Health Officer. It's a pretty small office. It's actually kind of like a startup because most US states don't have Surgeon Generals, even though there's a US Surgeon General and has been for some years. This office in California was brand new as of last year. And so I've been, working in this capacity and in this role for about a year now. And there's about, there's 4 staff level folks who support Dr. Burke-Harris now. And so at the beginning, there were 3 of us. And as you can imagine, working in state government, in public health and policy at a time like this, when we're dealing with a crisis like COVID-19, is sort of an unparalleled experience on many levels. And we've been lucky enough to be working on the area of how childhood adversity or early experiences that are really difficult, things like abuse and neglect, or growing up with a parent who might have a mental illness that's not dealt with or not adequately treated, what that can then do to the developing brain and body in ways that tend to give you long-term risks for a variety of chronic health conditions. And the whole charge of our office is actually to intervene to interrupt that cycle, because there's a lot that you can do if you have a patient in front of you who you think might be at risk for that kind of a setup in a biological sense. And you can strategize about how to really regulate their stress response to really decrease their longer term health condition risk. And so that's what our office is set up to do. And my job is really to bring in the evidence base for the work that we do.
Okay. All right. So with TCKs, okay, with over 60 episodes, a lot of TCKs that I know tend to pursue a career which is more mission, purpose-driven, or entrepreneurship. Of course, it's not always a definite. There are those who could be pursuing the corporate-based occupation. However, a lot of them tend to be able to stand out in, well, depends on the office culture. Sometimes it could be the best way, it could be the negative way. The reason being is that with the differing mindset, they tend to approach a certain matter in a different way. So I actually had one of our mutual friend, Margaret Ho, who I think she was in episode 40 or something. I can't recall. Apologies on that.
Yeah,
So
I love Margie.
yeah, for Margaret, for her pursuing a career as a biologist is based on her life as a TCK of questioning. Is that she wants to know, she likes authenticity, she likes curiosity, she likes being curious. And for yourself though, what pushes you to a career in the medical profession? Or is it based on your TCK experience, or is it something that you feel has always been inside of you?
It's a good question. And I'll just say for the viewers who may have seen Margie's episode and now we're watching this one, she and I have known each other since the 5th grade. We actually met in the Philippines and we're friends all throughout sort of 5th grade through 12th grade. And then we lived together again in Baltimore when I was doing my residency there and she was doing a postdoc. So she's somebody who has been in my life for a long time. She's one of my bridesmaids at my wedding and she's a dear friend. I would say that
she did not tell me that. She did not tell me that. Okay, sorry.
Well, that's why it's important to tell you that, but also to spell that out for the viewers. She's she and I are bosom buddies. So I think it's wonderful that she was able to do this, and I wanted to do it after she spoke so highly of her experience and thought it was a lot of fun. So I think for her, you mentioned a lot of the traits that sort of drew her to the profession that she chose, being grounded in being a TCK. I would say for me, it's probably less of that. I think that even if I had lived in one place, although it's hard to know who you would become if you hadn't had all of the experiences that have made you over the years. But I think kind of my motivations, I've always been really curious. I've loved to read. I've really loved to get deep into the mechanisms and the whys for how things work in the world, in the body, etc. And there's something about medicine that really satisfies that, because it is so evidence-based. It is so rigorous. We don't know many things in medicine still, right? But there are such rigorous ways of identifying what it is you know and what it is you don't know. And I think that was partly what drew me to it. Like in high school, I loved biology, but I truly also loved psychology, because I really enjoyed thinking about how the brain works and how people make decisions, and how it is that people, anthropology as well, right? Like how it is that people come to behave in groups the way that they do. So that was a big part of what drew me to medicine. It felt like something that I could excel at in those ways and be really deeply satisfied by, but also a field where you're constantly learning, and you know that you never, you know, that trope of being a lifelong learner really felt true to me. And those were all big parts of why I was attracted to medicine as a career.
All right. Okay. That is okay. That is fascinating. Yeah. Because this is okay. So, well, my family has never been involved in medicine, so this is something that is really, really profound and really deep, I guess. And this is something that I'm definitely curious to know more. But do you encounter, though, any kind of challenges when you first jump into this line? For one thing, is that I think I'm not sure if this stigma still continues, but there has always been a challenge for women in any kind of industry. And in the past, well, um, the nature of the job would make it a challenge for women unless you're maybe a nurse, which doesn't make sense in today's world. But have you ever encountered this challenge, Devika, or is there any other external circumstances that has challenged you in this job, both physically or even mentally?
Yeah, wow, there's definitely a lot there. I think that I came of age, as you heard, really as a young woman in Asia, right? And I think there are very different cultural norms that dictate what it is to be successful as a young woman in the workplace. In Southeast Asia specifically, and in the Philippines, versus what it takes in the US. And I think the difference can sometimes be, it's hard to tease out, but it's a very, very palpable thing. And it's something that a lot of young women that I've spoken to who have made a similar transition as myself have dealt with. And so for me, it wasn't so much on entering my profession, because remember, there were like 9 years that elapsed between me coming back to the US and really like, and being on the front lines of being a provider of pediatric medicine. But what I noticed immediately when I was 18 and I was navigating the classroom and I was taking, you know, college level courses and trying to get by, is that it felt to me like, because America is such an individualistic society, that there's always this emphasis on knowing your own preferences and knowing what you stand for in a way that doesn't feel as emphasized when you grow up in a collectivistic culture. So let me give you a very brief example. I remember when I moved to the US from India when I was 7, being asked at school, hey, what's your favorite color? And it was actually a question that isn't posed, or when I was growing up in the 80s in India, wasn't a thing that children were cultivated to think about or to establish. But it wasn't just, you know, color. It was sort of like, here's my favorite shape and here's my favorite letter. And, you know, like I'm being a little bit facetious, but it's a very different mold, because this idea of like choicefulness from a very early age, and agency and individualism, is very different, right? Because when you become an adult out of a system like that, and that's your only influence, the kind of adult that you are is someone who is pretty decisive. And I'm obviously generalizing, so it feels uncomfortable to do that, but let's just go with it for a second. But you're on average, right? Like the person is a little bit more aware, comfortable, asserting their own personhood, whether that is what to say no to, how to say yes, like how to make room in your day-to-day life, and also in your future for the kind of future that you really want to carve for yourself, versus seeing what it is that comes your way, what it is that you fall into, or that maybe you're nudged into. It's just a different orientation. So in the workplace as a woman, growing up in the Philippines, like the clear, I'm not happy with this, I want to say no to something, or this is not right. Like it wasn't a culturally acceptable thing to actually say it in those harsh terms. Whereas I think that coming to the US, and sort of my experience of it has been that it's a much more direct and assertive kind of a culture. And so I had to grow into that. And there's a lot of ways in which, in medicine in particular, when I did get into it 9 years later, I still found myself struggling a little bit with that, because you get, in Asia, as a girl, as a woman, you sort of just are acculturated to get along, to go along in a way, and you don't make like strong, decisive statements without getting a lot of backlash, without getting a lot of sort of negative reinforcement. Whereas that's exactly what is required when you are working in an intensive care unit, and there's like 4 minutes to quickly decide what you're going to do with this patient before you move on to the kind of the next one, and that person might be much more sick. And so it's a way of carrying yourself in the world that feels uncomfortable if you haven't done it your whole life. That took me a lot of intentionality to really cultivate.
All right. Okay. Earlier you mentioned on ICU. Yeah. Your specialty is on pediatrician, which is on children, right? So,
Yeah.
what do you feel though has been a big challenge for you? I mean, so on my milestone episode, I actually had Rayson Chu, who is also a noted podcaster in Singapore, who is also a general nurse. So he is somebody who I consider a mentor of sorts. He's a friend of mine. It's because he actually inspired me to start creating my own content on this. And for him, he has worked with a lot of patients with mental illness. So one of the pain that he mentioned to me is that when he is seeing somebody who is in their elder age, and then afterwards is that they could have given up on life of sort. For your case, however, you are working with children, those who are incredibly young, those who are now just about to start in their life, and yet they could be suffering from a very, very uncurable illness of sort. What has been your challenge on that, Devika?
One of the saddest things for sure when you're working in a hospital setting with children, I mean, is the act of having to console parents after a child passes, and whatever reason that is, whether it's sudden and acute and unexpected, or whether it's after a long drawn out battle with a long-term illness. That feeling, because it is thankfully so rare in a society like the US to be putting children in coffins, or whatever the burial is for that family. That is an extremely difficult experience to kind of work through with a family. But I think there's also such potential for when you can predict that the end of your life is coming. There's such potential to work within a system like to put into place a palliative care team to really make those last moments meaningful and kind of enriching in the ways that we all need to be able to actually say goodbye to somebody that we love. So I mean, that's one angle of it. And I would say the other thing to mention in this vein is that you know, everybody has heard about sort of how trying residency and medical school and so forth can be in terms of you know, working for 30 hours in a row, or working several nights without seeing family members because you're kind of sleeping in the daytime when they're around, and just the sheer exhaustion and the sheer number of hours and the struggle that a lot of us maintain to really hang on to our humanity, but also our mental and our physical health while we're going through all of that. And you may know this, but you know, the suicide rate in residents and medical students is just astronomical, and that's a big part of what you come face to face with when you're going through something like that too. So that also, I think, deserves to be talked about and said in this context.
Okay, thank you so much for being strong enough to answer that. Yeah. Okay. So I apologize maybe in advance, as this could be something that could be emotionally more impactful too. With the recent corona pandemic, a lot of things that we know are unexpected, and some of the statistics you mentioned earlier, some of that has skyrocketed, and I constantly check the news in Singapore or Indonesia or any other countries that I know that there are some of my friends are living there. And it kind of worries me also when you see the numbers though. While there is no direct cure yet for it, I know there are some of the researchers that says that there's some promising results, but until something came up, I think we can't really make a specific conclusion, right? So in this troubling times though, how do you feel people should take care of themselves? Because there are those who could have said that, oh, this is a conspiracy theory of sort, or in the end, well, because they already feel that they've been cooped up for a while, then they just want to break loose. They don't want to follow any kind of protocol. Maybe there are those who do the same thing, but they practice wearing a mask, they wash their hands, but as a result, well, it kind of still make it feel that you are still trying to challenge of an existing epidemic that people should be worried about. So what do you feel though is the precautions someone should take? And also along with that, what kind of information you feel is most valid to hear from with regard to the medical update on this?
Yeah, these are really, really important questions in our time, especially with so much misinformation spreading and with so many active clusters of COVID actually still being transmitted all around the world. And as us being TCKs, it's all the more unsettling and troubling because there's not a place right now in the world that it hasn't touched or been experienced by in some way or another. And of course that also affects the way in which we can take care of ourselves and to keep in touch with the loved ones in our lives, right? Right now, for instance, if you're not an Indian citizen coming into India, you know, just in terms of, I have like all of my family lives in India, like 30, 40 family members. But I think, you know, stepping back from all of that and taking sort of a holistic approach in terms of who we should listen to, it's trusted public health authorities. You know, it's in the US, people like Anthony Fauci and, you know, governors who are looking to the evidence and to the science as far as reopening strategies that really are responding to local numbers and local case rates. And looking to, the CDC and the NIH, and to the local health officers for a county to make decisions. But to know that across the board, it's really things like using masks and using really effective social distancing that will keep this virus at bay, right? Because it spreads from body to body, and we know that. And there's not really very much that we have right now in our arsenal to treat it, right? And knowing that the best way to prevent it or to decrease spread is really still behavioral. Yep. So we've been hearing all the same stuff for some time now, but it's all still sort of the best evidence / the best course of action that we have. But despite all that, I think it's really important right now, as rates of job loss and financial insecurity and isolation with all of the stay-at-home, shelter-in-place type of orders, that we really need to guard against as well. So I think this is a time where anything in your power to connect with other people in a safe way, whether it's via Zoom and trying to do little things that make you feel whole and connected, those are more important now than they ever have been before. And so even though it's harder to try to still find those connections and to find the things that give you a way of putting your stress into something productive, for instance, going for a jog or spending some time in nature or having a mindfulness practice, journaling, gratitude counting, apart from just connecting with the loved ones in your family. So all of that becomes kind of part of the arsenal that we have as well for staying well during these times.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's actually really, really, really good advices. All right. So, Devika, I have two final questions for you. So, for the first one is this: what do you feel though has been a blessing, and just to even that out, could be something that you considered a curse as a TCK? So this was actually posted by one of my viewers. So for her is that she is a Korean citizen. She grew up outside of Korea in Australia and Philippines, and well, the two countries that I mentioned has a much more open mindset as compared to a heavy conservative mindset that Korea has. She's actually back in South Korea, and she's been there for now almost a year due to COVID. And well, the culture shock was something she has difficulty in adjusting to. And well, this is her question, and I just paraphrase it because she feels that while being a TCK has given her plenty of advantage, and yet at the same time she feels that she's cursed by it. The reason being is that in a society that sees differences is not something that is to be celebrated, but in fact is considered a competition, she feels extremely tired because of it. So have you had that same experience, Devika?
Yeah, I think I relate to that statement in some ways. I feel that having grown up in so many different contexts and having that sense of really fluid interaction with the external world and having a lot of variables that were constantly shifting, you become very adaptable and you feel very okay with a whole range of situations. And that is a strength, right? In a lot of ways, you can make things work in many different kinds of scenarios, but it can also be hard sometimes to know how to find that anchor or feel grounded in a way of being, how to feel settled with yourself, because things have been so shifting around you. So it's a slightly different experience that I wanted to articulate around that. But I think for me, that would be the feature that feels both like a blessing and a curse.
Okay, so this is going to be my final question. Yeah. What future do you see in multicultural community? How do you think that they will be affecting the world? And what advice would you give for a young TCK who could just be started experiencing their identity crisis, or could be interested in a medical profession line, but may encounter circumstances that, well, would deny them the opportunity for it?
Well, first I would say, regardless of how acute and kind of strife-filled that crisis, the beginning of that crisis might feel, to just trust in the fact that not only have lots of us walked through this journey, and obviously every journey is its own and is different from everyone else's, but just to know that the feelings that it inspires at the very beginning, that make you feel like you're alone, that you're strange for undergoing this kind of an evolution in your life, where it may be something like cultural identity comes so easily to somebody else, to remember that at the end of the day, you are an incredibly unique and special person, and the journey that you're walking through right now is a necessary and integral part of that. And to just trust in the process, and to know that when you walk out the other end, you'll be appreciative for having gone through it, and for knowing all of the things about the world that you know because you're a TCK.
All right. Okay, that is actually my final question. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have to do the show a little bit differently. I always make a vow that when I make an episode and my guest is willing to go to put their face in front of the camera, I definitely would have to, I will definitely honor that, even if, well, we have to do it a little bit unconventionally since, yeah, I don't know why. StreamYard, why do you disappoint me? But okay, that is that is part of life, I guess. You never know.
It is rolling with the punches.
Hey, yeah. Again, I really have to thank Devika a lot for this. Yeah, for being so patient. She also is somebody who's really curious. She wants to learn more about the software, and I really really apologize that I can't do it as the way I used to do it. But don't worry, this episode will still be on my Facebook Live. It will be on my Global Citizens page, and yeah, I will definitely tag you in so that your friends and family members could see it in your social media. So for those of you who just tuned into the show for the very, very first time, yeah, Global Citizens is an online webcast, usually. So it's an online webcast whereby I invited those who have experienced a multicultural lifestyle, such as Devika and myself. We're both third culture kids. And I've also invited digital nomads and, of course, international speakers and expatriates. So the reason being is that, as what Devika has mentioned throughout this entire episode, her experiences growing out here and how it actually shaped her mindset. The difference is that when you come to a new country as a tourist, yes, you are exposed to a new country, a new kind of culture. But the thing is, it's not the same when you are living in that very culture. It's because you have to adapt to the mindset, and, well, not one place does not mean that every single other part of that country could be the same. Like, for example, if I myself, every single time I mention that I'm an Indonesian, they will either mention that, oh, Indonesians are rich people, or second, oh, I've been to Bali, I've been to Batam. I'm sorry, guys, but that could be incredibly offensive, or at least to me, I find it really offensive. Is because we all might not share this privilege, and, well, some of the areas that you guys have mentioned do not share the very kind of culture that all of the other places have encountered. So other than that, yeah, I actually need to give a little shout out, as actually there are those who actually leave some likes for the StreamYard announcement. So firstly is Miss ST. Thank you so much for living a life. And of course, my good buddy Ben Vogel. Ben is actually one of my past guests. He has his own show, and he and I have he and I have talked quite a lot. I actually know both him, his brother, and even their mother. So along with that, Lara, thank you so much for tuning in. Lara actually hosts her own podcast, and she has actually been on my show. And for those of you who will be tuning in a little bit later, thank you so much. And other than that, Devika, anything you want to mention?
Calvin, thank you so much for having me. It's been a really fun conversation, and I'm so glad we had a chance to do this.
Yeah, pleasure of mine, and welcome to that. And yeah, again, I sincerely apologize. I can't do it the same way I do things. And thank you so much for being so understanding and even being so patient about this.
No worries. This is no big deal. I can see your picture just fine as we're talking. So it's great.
Thank you. All right. All right. So I will end the show today. I will end the show. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a good day. Please, as what Devika has mentioned, please take care of yourself. It's all in your attitude. Yeah. Wash your hands, put on your mask, and well, people call it social distancing. I like to prefer physical distancing as well. I'm actually a lot more social in the time that I actually come inside.
Yes, agreed. Physical distancing is definitely the better term.
All right. And with that, that's the end of episode 65 of Global Citizens, conversation with a TCK pediatrician and general practitioner. So with that, have a good day, everyone, and take care of yourself. Bye.
Bye.